The tiny pink onesie trembled in Sarah Chen's hands as the first gunshot cracked through the October air. She had been sitting cross-legged on her nursery floor, surrounded by pastel mountains of baby clothes that still smelled of lavender detergent, and hope when the sound that would change everything shattered the peaceful afternoon of Millbrook Elementary School across the street. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Through her second story window, she could see children's shadows moving frantically behind classroom windows, their small silhouettes pressed against glass like trapped butterflies. The school's red brick facade, which she had admired every morning while drinking coffee and watching the cheerful chaos of arrival time, now seemed to pulse with menace. Another shot, then screaming high-pitched, innocent voices that cut through her chest like shrapnel. Sarah's muscle memory kicked in before her conscious mind could process what was happening. The onesie fell forgotten to the hardwood floor as her body moved with the fluid precision of someone who had learned to read danger in the twitch of a shadow, the glint of metal, the wrong kind of silence. Her pregnancy had ended her military career 6 months ago, but her instincts remained razor-sharp. Honed by missions in Afghanistan where a single hesitation meant death, she pressed herself against the window frame, her eyes automatically cataloging angles, distances, cover positions. The elementary school sat 97 meters from her house. She had measured it obsessively during her nesting phase, worried about traffic safety for her future child. Now that distance felt both impossibly far and intimately close. Her trained eye caught movement on the school's second floor, east wing. A figure in dark clothing moved past a classroom window, something long and metallic in his hands. "Danny," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her husband was at his law firm downtown, completely unaware that their quiet suburban neighborhood had become a war zone. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers, but stopped when she saw the police cars already screaming toward the school, their sirens wailing a soundtrack of chaos and confusion. The SWAT team would need time to set up, time to assess, time to plan, time that the children inside didn't have. Sarah could hear more shots now, rapid-fire bursts that echoed off the surrounding houses like deadly applause. A classroom window on the ground floor exploded outward in a shower of glass that caught the afternoon sunlight like falling diamonds. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where 6 months of pregnancy had created a small but noticeable curve. The baby inside her, their daughter Emma, kicked as if sensing her mother's elevated heart rate. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was preparing to become a mother while watching other people's children face unthinkable terror out in her bedroom closet, behind winter coats and forgotten photo albums. Her rifle case waited in silent patience. The Remington 700 she had carried through 3 tours, the weapon that had saved countless lives and taken others when necessary, she hadn't touched it since her discharge, hadn't even thought about it during the busy months of preparing for motherhood. But now, as she watched shadows move with lethal purpose through the school's windows, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders like an old, heavy coat. The neighborhood around her seemed frozen in surreal normalcy. Mrs. Patterson was still working in her garden next door, her white hair bobbing among the chrysanthemums, apparently unaware of the crisis unfolding across the street. The mail truck continued its lazy route down Maple Street. A jogger in bright yellow headphones bounced past, lost in music and oblivious to the nightmare just yards away. But Sarah saw everything with the hyper-clarity that combat had taught her. The architectural layout of the school building burned into her memory from months of casual observation. The wind direction and speed, measured by the way the flag hung limp on its pole. The sun's position, creating shadows that could provide concealment or expose movement. Most importantly, she could see the children, dozens of them pressed against windows, their faces pale with terror, their small hands splayed against glass as they watched for rescue that might come too late. Another gunshot. Closer this time. The sound triggered a flood of memories she had worked hard to suppress. The weight of her rifle scope against her eye. The steady rhythm of controlled breathing. The impossible stillness required to make shots that mattered. In Afghanistan, her callsign had been Guardian Angel. Her spotters used to joke that she could thread a needle from 1,000 yards out. She had never missed when lives depended on her accuracy. Through the chaos, Sarah's tactical mind began, processing information with mechanical precision. The school had been built in 1987, a fact she remembered from the Historical Society newsletter she'd read while researching the neighborhood. 2 stories, east and west wings connected by a central corridor. Approximately 400 students, ages 5 to 11. Multiple entrances, but the main office was in the east wing, which meant the attackers had likely entered there. To maximize control, she counted the figures moving through the windows. At least 3, possibly more. They moved with purpose, not panic, which suggested military or police training. This wasn't random violence, it was coordinated, planned, professional. The kind of operation that required precise countermeasures and split-second decision-making. The baby clothes scattered around her feet seemed to mock the situation's gravity. Tiny socks with animals on them, sleepers with snaps that she had. Practiced opening and closing. A mobile with dancing elephants that played Brahms' lullaby. 6 months ago, she had been Sarah Chen, expectant mother and retired warrior. Now she was faced with an impossible choice: remain a civilian and hope the authorities could handle the crisis, or become Guardian Angel one more time. Sarah's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Active shooter, Millbrook Elementary, shelter in place. Avoid the area. The clinical language couldn't capture the reality she was witnessing. The small faces pressed against windows. The terror in children's eyes. The seconds ticking away while help remained minutes away. She moved to her bedroom with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to high-stakes decision-making. The rifle case opened with a soft click that seemed to echo through the house like a declaration of intent. The Remington felt familiar in her hands, its weight and balance as comfortable as an old friend's handshake. She had cleaned and maintained it religiously, even during her pregnancy. More out of habit than expectation of use. The scope slides mounted smoothly, muscle memory guiding her fingers through the familiar ritual. Bolt action, chamber clear, safety engaged. Everything exactly as it should be. As she moved back toward the nursery window, Sarah caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. A woman in maternity clothes holding a precision rifle. The incongruity stark and surreal. From her window, the tactical situation was becoming clearer. The attackers had positioned themselves to control key corridors and exits, trapping the children and staff inside. Police sirens were getting closer, but she could see the SWAT vehicle still blocks away, stuck behind the elementary schools. Dismissal traffic that had turned evacuation routes into gridlock. A small girl appeared in a second-story window, directly across from Sarah's position. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with brown pigtails and a bright red sweater. The child's mouth was open in what was obviously a scream, though the glass muffled any sound. Behind her, Sarah could see the shadow of an adult. Figure a teacher, probably, trying to shield her students while simultaneously searching for escape routes that didn't exist. The girl in the red sweater pressed her hands against the glass, and Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't about tactics or training or rules of engagement anymore. This was about a child who looked terrifyingly similar to the daughter growing inside her belly. A little girl who deserved to go home to her family tonight and tell them about her ordinary day at elementary school. Sarah's breathing steadied into the rhythm she had learned in sniper school. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, repeat. Her heartbeat slowed to match the cadence, her body remembering the physiological control that made impossible shots possible. Through her scope, The school building leaped into crisp, magnified focus. The wind was negligible, maybe 2 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature 74 degrees, humidity low. Perfect shooting conditions, if such a thing existed in a situation like this. She had a clear line of sight to most of the school's windows from her elevated position. And the afternoon sun was behind her, which meant her scope wouldn't create revealing glints. Creating these detailed stories requires extensive research and careful writing. If you're enjoying this intense story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more gripping content. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Sarah's phone rang, jarring her from her tactical assessment. Danny's name flashed on the screen, and she answered on the second ring, never taking her eye from the scope. "Sarah, thank God. I'm seeing news reports about the school. Are you safe?" "Get away from the windows, and fine," she said quietly. Her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding across the street. "Danny, I need you to listen to me carefully. There are children trapped in that school, and I have a clear view from the nursery window." "No." His voice was sharp with understanding and fear. "Sarah, no. You're 6 months pregnant. You're not a Marine anymore. Let the police handle this." Through the scope, she watched one of the gunmen move past a classroom window. He was wearing tactical gear, military-style boots, and carried what looked like an R-15. Professional equipment, professional movement. This wasn't some disturbed individual with a handgun. This was organized terrorism designed to maximize casualties and trauma. "The police are still setting up," Sarah said, adjusting her scope's focus. "I can see at least 3 gunmen, possibly more. They have the school locked down tight. SWAT won't be in position for another 10 minutes at minimum. Please." Danny's voice cracked. "Think about Emma. Think about our daughter." Sarah's hand moved to her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement inside. Emma, their perfect daughter, due in 3 months, already loved beyond measure. A child who would grow up in a world where elementary schools could become battlegrounds, where innocence could be shattered by strangers with military weapons. "I am thinking about her," Sarah whispered. "I'm thinking about all of them." She ended the call and silenced the phone. Through her scope, the little girl in the red sweater was still pressed against the window, her teacher now clearly visible. Beside her, the woman looked young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of gentle face that suggested she had chosen elementary education out of genuine love for children. She was holding the little girl's hand while simultaneously trying to keep other students away from the windows. A shadow moved in the hallway behind them. Sarah's finger found the rifle's safety, disengaging it with a soft click that seemed to echo through the nursery like a countdown timer. The scope's crosshairs tracked the movement as a figure in black, tactical gear, entered the classroom. Guardian Angel was back on duty. The gunman raised his weapon toward the teacher and children. Sarah's world narrowed to the circle of her scope. Her breathing steady, her heartbeat slow and controlled. 97 meters. Slight upward angle. Glass barrier that would affect bullet trajectory, minimally at this range. Through the radio traffic she could hear from the street below, she caught fragments of police communication. Multiple suspects, unknown number of hostages. Setting. Up perimeter. Need more time. Time the children didn't have. Sarah centered the crosshairs on the gunman's center mass, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. 8 years of training compressed into a single moment of decision. The weight of her unborn daughter, the faces of trapped children, the oath she had taken to protect the innocent, all of it balanced on the edge of a decision that would change everything. The gunman's finger tightened on his trigger. Sarah's finger tightened on hers. In the distance, sirens wailed their urgent song, but they were still too far away, still caught in the chaos of evacuation traffic and emergency response protocols. The children in that classroom had seconds, not minutes. The little girl in the red sweater looked directly at Sarah's window, as if sensing the presence of someone watching. For a moment that lasted forever, their eyes met across the impossible. Distance between safety and terror, between childhood and nightmare, between life and death. Sarah whispered a prayer. She hadn't spoken since Afghanistan. God grant me steady hands and a true aim. The crosshairs settled. Her breathing stopped. The world held its breath. Sarah Chen had never planned to be a killer. Even during her 8 years as a Marine Corps sniper, she preferred to think of herself as a protector, a guardian who stood watch so that others could sleep safely in their beds. The distinction mattered to her in ways that most people couldn't understand, especially during the quiet hours when memories of distant faces haunted her dreams. The path to this moment had begun 29 years ago in a small apartment above her parents' restaurant in San Francisco's Richmond district. The Golden Dragon served the best dim sum in the neighborhood, and Sarah had grown up folding wontons after school while her mother, Lynn, worked the kitchen with the fierce precision of a master chef. Her father, James, handled the front of house, with the easy charm that made regular customers feel like family. Discipline and patience, her mother used to say while teaching Sarah to fold the perfect dumpling. These are the foundations of everything worth doing. Lin Chun had immigrated from Hong Kong with nothing but culinary skills and an unshakable belief that hard work could overcome any obstacle. She had never imagined that her daughter would apply those same principles to military service, to the careful art of long-distance precision shooting. Sarah's decision to join the Marines had shocked her parents, who had dreamed of their daughter becoming a doctor or engineer. The conversation still echoed in her memory, the weight of disappointment in her mother's voice when she announced her enlistment after college graduation. "You have so many opportunities," Lynn had said, her English still colored by the cadence of Cantonese despite 30 years in America. "Why do you want to go to war?" "I want to serve something bigger than myself," Sarah had replied, though even then she wasn't sure she fully understood her own motivations. The terrorist attacks of September 11th had happened during her sophomore year at UC Berkeley, and like many of her generation, she felt called to defend the freedoms that her immigrant parents had sacrificed so much to reach. Military service had revealed capabilities Sarah never knew she possessed. Her small frame, 5 feet 4 inches and barely 130 pounds, seemed unsuited for combat roles, but her exceptional eyesight and natural steadiness made her ideal for precision marksmanship. She could hold a rifle motionless for hours, her breathing controlled, her heartbeat slow and steady. More importantly, she possessed the psychological makeup for the sniper's lonely burden, the ability to make life and death decisions in isolation. Far from backup or support, her first confirmed kill had been in Afghanistan's Helmand province, a Taliban commander who was directing attacks on a school in a small village outside Kandahar. Through her scope, she had watched him for 3 days, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect shot that would eliminate the threat without risking civilian casualties. When the moment came, her bullet had traveled 847 meters to find its target, ending the siege and saving the lives of 63 children and their teachers. That night, she had called her parents from the firebase, needing to hear familiar voices. From the world where children went to school safely and mothers cooked dinner without fear of mortar attacks. She couldn't tell them about the shot, couldn't explain the complex mixture of relief and grief that came with taking a life to save others. Instead, she talked about the weather, about missing her mother's cooking, about anything except the weight settling onto her shoulders. "I'm proud of you," her father had said before hanging up, his voice soft with an emotion he rarely expressed. "I don't understand what you're doing over there, but I'm proud of the woman you've become." Over 3 tours, Sarah had made 43 confirmed kills, each one carefully documented and justified. Taliban commanders, insurgent leaders, bomb makers who targeted civilians. She had become a ghost on the battlefield, a legend whispered. about in enemy camps and celebrated in Marine Corps lore. Her spotter, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, used to joke that she could put a bullet through a quarter at 1,000 yards. But Sarah knew the truth was more complex and more terrible. She didn't shoot targets. She shot people. Human beings with families and histories and dreams that ended abruptly when her finger tightened on the trigger. Each face stayed with her, filed away in a mental gallery that grew heavier with every deployment. She told herself that each shot prevented greater suffering, that her precision saved innocent lives. But the weight remained. The pregnancy had been a surprise that became a blessing. At 35, Sarah had assumed her military career would end with retirement to some quiet civilian job where her most dangerous decision involved choosing between whole wheat and sourdough. But Emma had changed everything, growing inside her like a promise of hope and redemption. For the first time in years, Sarah began to believe she could leave the warrior behind and become something gentler. Danny had been patient with her transition to civilian life, understanding her need for routine and structure. He was a tax attorney, methodical and kind, with no military background, but an intuitive grasp of what she needed to heal. They had met at a coffee shop near the VA hospital where Sarah was receiving counseling, and he had somehow seen past the carefully maintained facade to recognize the woman she was trying to become. "You don't have to carry all that weight alone," he had told her on their third date when she finally opened up about her service. "You did your job, and now you get to do something else. You get to build a family and watch your daughter grow up safe." Safety. The word had become Sarah's obsession during pregnancy. She researched neighborhoods with military precision, analyzing crime statistics, school ratings, and emergency response times before choosing the house on Maple Street. Millbrook Elementary had been a major selling point, highly rated, well-funded. With a reputation for nurturing young minds in a secure environment, she had walked through the school during registration, marveling at the bright classrooms filled with children's artwork and the cheerful chaos of learning and progress. The teachers seemed genuinely caring. The principal was a former educator with 30 years of experience, and the security measures appeared adequate for a suburban elementary school. Sarah had felt something unclench in her chest as she imagined Emma running through those hallways, making friends, discovering the joy of reading and mathematics and science. The nursery had become her sanctuary. During the long months of pregnancy, she spent hours arranging and rearranging tiny clothes, reading parenting books, and practicing the art of peaceful anticipation. The room faced east, catching the morning light that seemed to promise endless possibilities for their daughter's future. From the window, she could see Millbrook Elementary across the street, its red brick walls and cheerful playground, a daily reminder of the safe, normal childhood Emma would enjoy. Sarah had packed away her military gear with ceremonial care, sealing her uniforms and equipment in storage containers that she planned never to open again. The rifle case had been the last item, a final acknowledgement that Guardian Angel was retiring. She had cleaned and oiled the Remington one last time, her hands moving through the familiar ritual while tears she couldn't explain rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she had whispered to the weapon that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. "Thank you for bringing me home." But now, holding that same rifle while watching children trapped in terror, Sarah realized that some burdens couldn't be simply packed away. The skills that had made her an effective sniper, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to make impossible shots under impossible conditions, to carry the weight of other people's lives, were part of who she was, woven into her DNA as surely as her love for her unborn daughter. Through the scope, she could see the classroom more clearly now. The teacher was trying to move the children away from the windows, herding them toward the back corner where they might be safer. The little girl in the red sweater was crying, her small body shaking with fear. but she was following the teacher's whispered instructions with the heartbreaking obedience of a well-behaved child. Facing incomprehensible danger, the gunman had paused in the doorway, apparently listening to something in his radio headset. His finger was still on the trigger, his weapon still pointed toward the huddle of children and their teacher. Sarah could see the tactical gear he wore, the professional way he held his rifle, the cold efficiency in his movements. This wasn't random violence, it was a coordinated attack designed to inflict maximum trauma on the community. Sarah's mind raced through tactical considerations, while her body remained perfectly still. Wind speed minimal, temperature stable, target stationary. The glass barrier would affect bullet trajectory slightly, but at this range, with this equipment, the shot was well within her capabilities. She had made far more difficult shots under worse conditions in Afghanistan, but this wasn't Afghanistan. This was suburban Massachusetts, her neighborhood, her future daughter's school. The rules of engagement were unclear, the legal ramifications potentially catastrophic. She was a pregnant civilian now, not a military sniper operating under orders. If she took this shot, she would be acting entirely on her own authority, based on her judgment of an unfolding situation. The phone buzzed again, Danny calling back, probably frantic with worry. She ignored it, maintaining her position while watching the classroom drama unfold. The teacher was young, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest face that suggested she had entered education out of genuine love for children. She was whispering something to her students, probably reassuring them, trying to project calm while her own terror was visible in the tight lines around her eyes. Sarah found herself thinking about her mother's hands, the way Lin Chun could fold hundreds of dumplings with mechanical precision, while her mind wandered to other concerns. The body remembers what the mind teaches it, her mother used to say. Practice until it becomes natural, then trust your hands to know what to do. Sarah's hands knew what to do. 8 years of training had created muscle memory that responded faster than conscious thought. Her breathing was controlled, her heartbeat steady, her finger positioned on the trigger with the kind of practiced familiarity that came from thousands of rounds, fired in training and dozens of successful missions. In combat, the gunman raised his radio to his mouth, speaking quietly into the microphone clipped to his tactical vest. Through the scope, Sarah could read his lips. East wing secured, ready for Phase 2. Phase 2. This was part of a larger plan, a coordinated attack with multiple stages. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach as she realized the full scope of what was unfolding. This wasn't just a school shooting, it was something more organized, more deadly. The kind of operation that required extensive planning and professional execution. She thought about Emma, growing safe and warm inside her belly, protected from the violence and chaos of the outside world. In 3 months, her daughter would be born into a world where elementary schools could become battlegrounds, where trained killers could walk into classrooms full of innocent children and open fire without hesitation or remorse. But not today. Not if Sarah Chen, guardian angel, had anything to say about it. The crosshairs centered on the gunman's chest. Sarah's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had learned in sniper school, her body automatically entering the state of controlled calm that made precision shooting possible. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, the steady pressure of the rifle against her shoulder, the whisper-soft contact between her finger and the trigger. The little girl in the red sweater looked toward the window again, as if sensing salvation might come from outside the school walls. For a moment, Sarah imagined her own daughter at 7 years old, sitting in a classroom just like this one, trusting that the adults around her would keep her safe from harm. The gunman's finger began to tighten on his trigger. Sarah's finger mirrored the movement. In the distance, sirens wailed their urgent song, but they were still minutes away from effective response. The children in that classroom had seconds. Guardian angel whispered a prayer and took the shot. The rifle's report was sharp and clean, echoing off the houses around Maple Street like a thunderclap in the quiet afternoon. Through the scope, Sarah saw the classroom window spiderweb with cracks as her bullet punched through the glass and found its target. The gunman dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the floor as he fell. The teacher's face appeared in the broken window, confusion and terror mixing with the first faint hope that rescue might be possible. She was looking around frantically, trying to understand where the shot had come from. Who might be helping them? Sarah was already working the bolt, chambering another round while scanning for the next target. Through her scope, she could see movement in other classrooms, other figures in tactical gear moving with deadly purpose through the school's corridors. The little girl in the red sweater was safe for the moment, but dozens of other children remained trapped throughout the building. Her phone was buzzing incessantly, now Danny calling again, probably having heard the rifle shot even from downtown. Sarah ignored it, focusing on the tactical situation developing across the street. She could hear shouting from inside the school, voices raised in alarm as the remaining attackers realized they were under fire from an unknown position. Through the radio chatter she could monitor from the street below, fragments of police communication reached her. Shots fired from unknown location. Possible sniper. Need to identify friendly forces. Sarah smiled grimly. She wasn't a friendly force anymore. She was something else entirely. Something the tactical manuals didn't have a category for. She was a mother protecting children, a guardian angel with a rifle and the skills to use it effectively. The scope swept across the school building, searching for targets. In the West Wing, she caught movement in a second-story classroom, another gunman, another group of trapped children. The range was slightly longer, maybe 110 meters, but well within her capabilities. She centered the crosshairs and began to control her breathing. The second shot came 3 minutes after the first, and this time Sarah saw the muzzle flash from a different window as another gunman fell. The tactical coordination of the attack was becoming clear. Now they had positioned themselves to control key choke points throughout the school, trapping children and staff in killing zones while maintaining communication with each other through radio headsets. From her elevated position in the nursery, Sarah could see the full scope of their operation. It was professionally planned and executed, with timing that suggested military or law enforcement training. They had entered during the lunch period, when children were moving through hallways and teachers were focused on meal supervision rather than security protocols. Maximum chaos, maximum vulnerability, maximum potential casualties. Sarah's third target was moving through the main corridor, apparently responding to radio calls about sniper fire. Through her scope, she could see his tactical gear body armor, helmet, military-style boots. He carried an AR-15 with practiced familiarity, moving with the kind of disciplined advance that spoke of extensive training. This wasn't some lone wolf with grievances and inadequate preparation. This was coordinated terrorism. The shot was more difficult. He was moving, partially concealed by the corridor wall, presenting only glimpses of target opportunity as he advanced toward the East Wing, where her first kill had occurred. Sarah waited, controlling her breathing, tracking his movement pattern. Military training made him predictable in some ways. He would pause at each doorway to assess threat levels before advancing, giving her a brief window of opportunity. When he paused at the intersection of two hallways, Sarah took the shot. The bullet punched through the corridor window and struck him center mass, dropping him instantly. His weapon clattered across the polished floor tiles, sliding out of reach. 3 down. Unknown number remaining. The radio chatter from the street was becoming more urgent now. Police units were arriving in greater numbers, but the SWAT team was still setting up perimeter positions and trying to assess the threat level. She could hear fragments of communication that suggested confusion about the source of sniper fire. Unknown shooter engaging hostiles. Possible friendly fire incident. Need to identify source of rifle fire. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Police scanner says sniper fire at school. Please tell me that's not you. She ignored the message, focusing on the tactical situation. Through her scope, she could see children's faces pressed against classroom windows throughout the building. They were trapped, terrified, waiting for rescue that was still minutes away. Every second of delay meant higher risk of casualties, more trauma for young minds that should be focused on spelling tests and playground games. Instead of surviving coordinated terrorist attacks. Movement in the principal's office caught her attention. A figure in black tactical gear was dragging a woman in business attire, probably an administrator, across the room. Through the window, Sarah could see the hostage's face, pale with terror, eyes wide with the kind of primal fear that comes from facing imminent death. This shot would be the most difficult yet. The target was using the hostage as a human shield, positioning her between himself and any potential threats. Sarah would need to wait for a clear shot, a moment when the hostage moved out of the line of fire and exposed the terrorist to her crosshairs. She settled into the familiar rhythm of patience and preparation. In Afghanistan, she had once waited 18 hours for a shot, lying motionless in a sniper hide while observing a Taliban compound. The shot, when it came, had lasted less than a second, but the preparation had taken most of the day. Patience was as important as accuracy in precision shooting. Through her scope, she watched the scene in the principal's office unfold. The terrorist was speaking into his radio headset, probably coordinating with remaining team members or receiving instructions from external controllers. His attention was focused on communication rather than threat assessment, a tactical mistake that might provide the opportunity Sarah needed. The hostage Sarah could see now that it was the school principal, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of gentle face that suggested a lifetime dedicated to education, was trembling but not panicking. She seemed to be trying to engage her captor in conversation, possibly attempting to humanize herself or distract him from his mission. Smart woman, Sarah thought. She's buying time. Time that Sarah intended to use effectively. The terrorist moved toward the window, apparently trying to assess the source of sniper fire that had eliminated 3 of his team members. As he approached the glass, he momentarily released his grip on the principal's arm, creating a narrow window of opportunity. Sarah's crosshairs settled on the center of his exposed torso. Her breathing slowed to the familiar rhythm, her heartbeat steady and controlled. The shot was approximately 95 meters through glass, with a slight downward angle that would affect bullet trajectory minimally. The trigger squeeze was smooth and deliberate, a single fluid motion that sent the bullet across the distance between the nursery and the school office. Through the scope, Sarah saw the window explode inward as her shot found its target. The terrorist dropped immediately, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers as he collapsed behind the principal's desk. 4 down. The principal was looking around frantically, trying to understand what had happened, where the shots were coming from. Sarah could see her mouth moving, probably praying or trying to call for help, but she was alive, unharmed, free to find safety in the growing chaos of police response. Sarah worked the bolt action, chambering another round while scanning for additional targets. The tactical situation was changing now. The remaining terrorists would be aware that they were under fire from a precision marksman, possibly military trained, with an elevated position that commanded most of the school building. They would be adapting their tactics, seeking cover, trying to identify her position. Through the radio chatter, she could hear police communications becoming more coordinated. Multiple suspects down. Unknown sniper. Need to establish contact with shooter. Her phone rang. Danny again. This time she answered, keeping her voice low while maintaining her position at the scope. Sarah, please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing. I'm protecting children, she said quietly, her eye never leaving the scope as she continued scanning for targets. 4 terrorists down, unknown number remaining. Jesus Christ. His voice was thick with fear and love and resignation. "You're pregnant. You're 6 months pregnant with our daughter." "I know exactly how pregnant I am," Sarah replied, adjusting her scope's focus on a shadow moving through a first-floor classroom. "And that's precisely why I'm doing this. Emma deserves to grow up in a world where children are safe in their schools." "The police are still setting up perimeter positions," Sarah interrupted. "SWAT isn't in position yet. The children don't have time for proper protocols and tactical assessment. They have right now, and right now I'm the only thing standing between them and mass casualties." Through the scope, she identified her 5th target. This one was more cautious than the others, using classroom furniture as cover while moving toward an exit route. He had learned from the fate of his team members, adapting his tactics to account for precision fire from an elevated position. Sarah respected his skill even as she prepared to kill him. Professional terrorists weren't mindless fanatics, they were trained operatives following specific protocols designed to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure. This man was good at his job, which made him more dangerous to the children and more challenging for Sarah to eliminate. She tracked his movement through the classroom, waiting for him to expose himself enough for a clean shot. He was using kindergarten desks as concealment, moving in short rushes between cover positions. Sarah could see children's artwork on the walls behind him, paintings and crayon drawings that depicted families and pets in sunny days, the innocent expressions of minds too young to understand that evil existed in their world. The terrorist paused behind a reading corner, apparently listening to radio communications. Sarah could see part of his shoulder and arm exposed beyond the bookshelf he was using for cover. Not a perfect shot, but possible for someone with her training and equipment. She was preparing to fire when movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A small figure in the classroom, a child who had somehow avoided evacuation or been separated from his group, was crawling under the desks, trying to reach the door. The little boy couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with sandy hair and a superhero t-shirt that made him look impossibly vulnerable in the tactical nightmare surrounding him. The terrorist saw the child's movement and raised his weapon. Sarah didn't hesitate. The shot had to be perfect, close enough to the child that any error would be catastrophic, through furniture and debris that could deflect the bullet's path, at an angle that required precise calculation of trajectory and impact point. Guardian Angel whispered a prayer and took the shot. The bullet found its target with surgical precision, dropping the terrorist instantly while the little boy continued his crawl toward safety. Through her scope, Sarah watched the child reach the classroom door, push it open, and disappear into the hallway where police officers were finally beginning to advance through the building. 5 down. The phone was buzzing again, not Danny this time, but an unknown number. Sarah ignored it, focusing on the tactical situation. Police units were swarming the building now, moving with the coordinated precision of a SWAT team that had finally established their operational parameters. Through her scope, she could see officers in tactical gear advancing through corridors, clearing rooms with methodical efficiency. But Sarah's trained eye caught something the ground-level officers couldn't see from their position. Movement on the school's roof, 2 figures in dark clothing setting up what looked like explosive devices near the building's main support structure. The terrorists had a contingency plan, a final devastating act designed to bring down the entire building if their primary mission failed. The range to the rooftop was approximately 140 meters at a steep upward angle, a challenging shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible while pregnant and shooting from an improvised position. But Sarah had made harder shots in Afghanistan, where the difference between impossible and necessary was measured in the lives. Hanging in the balance. She adjusted her scope for the increased range and elevation, her mind automatically calculating windage and bullet drop. The terrorists on the roof were moving with urgent efficiency, clearly aware that their ground-level team had been neutralized. They were racing against time, trying to complete their demolition setup before police helicopter support arrived, or ground forces reached the roof access. Through her scope, Sarah could see the explosive devices they were placing military-grade charges positioned to collapse the school's main structural supports. If they succeeded in detonating those charges, the entire building would come down on top of the hundreds of children and staff still inside, turning rescue into recovery and triumph into unspeakable tragedy. The first rooftop terrorist was kneeling beside a support beam, his hands working with practiced speed to attach what looked like C4 explosives. Sarah centered her crosshairs on his torso, compensating for the steep angle and increased range. The shot would push her equipment to its limits, but Guardian Angel had never failed when children's lives depended on her accuracy. The rifle's report echoed across the neighborhood as Sarah's sixth shot found its target. The terrorist on the Fay roof pitched forward, his body sliding down the sloped surface before coming to rest against the building's rain gutter. His explosive device remained undetonated, its timer frozen at whatever interval he had been setting when death interrupted his work. One terrorist remained on the roof, and he had heard his partner fall. Sarah could see him through her scope, abandoning his own explosive device to seek cover behind the building's heavy equipment. He was speaking rapidly into his radio headset, probably calling for extraction or backup support, but he had made a tactical error in his panic. From Sarah's elevated position, she could see him clearly despite his attempted concealment. The Vake unit provided cover from ground-level threats, but left him exposed to precision fire from her angle of attack. Sarah's seventh shot dropped him before he could complete his radio transmission. The explosive threat was neutralized, but Sarah's tactical mind was already processing the next phase of the crisis. 7 terrorists eliminated, but the coordinated nature of their attack suggested additional assets, getaway vehicles, communication support, possibly even backup teams positioned around the school perimeter. Through the increasing chaos of police response, Sarah could hear helicopter rotors approaching, news crews arriving to document the aftermath, or police aviation support moving into position. The tactical situation was evolving rapidly now, with multiple agencies coordinating response efforts while trying to account for an unknown sniper who had eliminated most of the terrorist threat. Her phone buzzed with another call from the unknown number. This time she answered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "This is Detective Mike Sullivan, State Police Tactical Unit. Are you the sniper who's been engaging the hostiles?" "I am," Sarah replied, never taking her eye from the scope as she continued scanning for additional threats. "Ma'am, I need you to identify yourself and your position. We have officers moving through the building, and we need to ensure no friendly fire incidents." Sarah hesitated. Once she identified herself to law enforcement, the legal and political complications would begin. Questions about authority, jurisdiction, rules of engagement. Investigations and paperwork and congressional hearings about pregnant civilians taking armed action against terrorists on American soil. But through her scope, she could see children being led to safety by police officers, their small faces marked by terror but their bodies intact and alive. The little girl in the red sweater was among them, holding her teacher's hand as they evacuated through the school's main entrance. "Sarah Chen," she said finally. "Former Marine Corps sniper, 3 tours Afghanistan. I'm in the house directly across the street from the school's main entrance, 2nd floor, facing east." "Copy that, Miss Chen. Outstanding work. Can you maintain overwatch while we complete the building clearance?" "Affirmative," Sarah replied, settling back into her scope. "I have eyes on the entire structure. No movement detected on remaining floors." Through her scope, she watched the evacuation proceed with increasing efficiency. Children were being led to buses positioned safely away from the building, their teachers maintaining calm while emergency medical personnel checked each child for injuries or trauma symptoms. The coordination was impressive, dozens of agencies working together to transform chaos into controlled response. But Sarah's sniper training kept her focused on threat assessment rather than celebration. The attack had been too well coordinated, too professionally executed, to end with the elimination of ground-level operators. Somewhere nearby, there would be support personnel, communications specialists, extraction teams, possibly even backup assault elements waiting for the right moment to strike. Her scope swept across the neighborhood surrounding the school, looking for vehicles that didn't belong, faces that seemed too alert, any indication that the terrorist cell had additional assets in the area. The houses around Maple Street appeared normal, residents standing in their yards watching the police response, news crews setting up broadcast positions, the usual chaos that followed major incidents in suburban communities. But they're parked 3 blocks away, barely visible through the trees. Sarah caught sight of a black SUV with tinted windows and government license plates. Not police or FBI, based on its positioning and the fact that it wasn't part of the coordinated response effort. The vehicle was positioned to provide overwatch of the school area while remaining concealed from ground-level observation. Through her scope, Sarah could see 2 figures in the front seats, both wearing dark clothing and speaking into radio handsets. They weren't law enforcement. Their positioning was wrong. Their equipment different from the police units she could observe throughout the area. Backup terrorists, or extraction team, or communication support. It didn't matter which, they represented a continuing threat to the children and families in the area. Sarah adjusted her scope for the increased range, approximately 280 meters through multiple obstacles, including tree branches and residential structures. The shot would be at the extreme edge of her equipment's effective range, complicated by intervening obstacles and the angle required to reach the target vehicle. But as she prepared to engage the distant threat, Sarah heard something that made her pause, the sound of her own daughter moving inside her belly, a gentle flutter that reminded her of the life growing within her body. Emma was responding to her mother's elevated heart rate, the stress chemicals flooding Sarah's system as she transitioned from protective mother to combat operative. For a moment, the weight of what she was doing crashed down on her. She was 6 months pregnant, engaged in precision shooting from an improvised position, taking lives based on tactical assessment and split-second decisions. In 3 months, she would be holding her newborn daughter, trying to explain a world where sometimes mothers had to become warriors to keep their children safe. The phone buzzed. Again, Danny calling, probably frantic with worry as news reports began broadcasting details of the school attack and police response. Sarah let it ring while she maintained her position, watching the suspicious vehicle through her scope. One of the figures in the SUV was reaching for something in the back seat, a long, cylindrical object that looked disturbingly like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized the terrorists' final contingency. If they couldn't destroy the school from inside, they would level it from a distance, killing police officers and children alike in a devastating finale to their coordinated attack. There was no time to call for police backup, no opportunity to coordinate with ground units who couldn't even see the distant threat. Sarah was the only person in position to prevent a catastrophic escalation of violence. She centered her crosshairs on the figure handling the RPG, her breathing controlled despite the extreme range and difficult angle. At 280 meters through multiple obstacles, the shot was at the very limit of what was possible with her equipment and training. Guardian Angel whispered a prayer for steady hands and true aim. The 8th and final shot of the engagement split the afternoon air like thunder, the bullet traveling across the distance to find its target, just as the terrorist was raising the RPG to firing position. Through her scope, Sarah saw him pitch backward, the launcher falling from his hands as his partner in the driver's seat realized their position had been compromised. The SUV's engine roared to life as the surviving terrorist attempted to flee. But police units were already converging on the area in response to Detective Sullivan's radio calls. Sarah watched through her scope as patrol cars surrounded the vehicle, officers taking the final terrorist into custody without further violence. The immediate threat was over. 8 terrorists eliminated, their support network disrupted, their weapons secured. Through her scope, Sarah could see the last of the children being evacuated from the school building, their small faces marked by trauma, but their bodies alive and intact. Sarah set down her rifle with hands that were finally beginning to shake, the adrenaline of combat giving way to the emotional weight of what she had done. 8 human beings were dead because of her actions, their lives ended by precision shots from a pregnant woman, sitting in a nursery surrounded by baby clothes and stuffed animals. But 400 children were walking out of that school building alive, going home to their families instead of becoming statistics in another American tragedy. The mathematics of violence were cruel but clear. 8 deaths to prevent hundreds. Tactical elimination to avoid mass casualties. Sarah's phone was ringing constantly. Now Danny. Her parents, probably reporters who had somehow obtained her number. Through the law enforcement communication she'd had with Detective Sullivan. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the gentle movement of her daughter inside her belly. "It's over, Emma," she whispered to her unborn child. "The bad people are gone. You're safe." Through the nursery window, she could see the school building, standing intact against the afternoon sky, its red brick walls scarred by gunfire, but structurally sound. Children were being reunited with frantic parents in the parking lot, families embracing with the desperate relief that comes from surviving the unthinkable. Sarah thought about the little girl in the red sweater, now safely in her mother's arms, probably trying to explain what had happened in words too young to capture the full horror of the experience. That child would grow up knowing that evil existed in the world, but also that sometimes guardian angels stood watch from unexpected places. "Detective," Sullivan's voice came through her phone. "Miss Chen, we're going to need you to come down and speak with us. There are procedures for this kind of incident." "I understand," Sarah replied, though she made no move to leave her position. From the window, she could still see the tactical aftermath unfold in evidence teams photographing the scene, medical examiners processing the deceased terrorists, FBI agents beginning the investigation that would uncover the full scope of the planned attack. Sarah knew her life was about to change dramatically. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, congressional hearings about the role of armed civilians in terrorist incidents. Her pregnancy would make the story even more compelling to news media hungry for human interest, angles on national security stories. But as she watched children walking safely to their families, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with military protocol or legal justification. She had done what guardian angels were supposed to do. She had stood watch over innocence and prevented evil from triumphing. Emma kicked gently inside her belly, as if recognizing that the crisis had passed and safety had been restored. Sarah smiled, imagining her daughter's future, the childhood that would be possible because sometimes ordinary people were called upon to do extraordinary things in defense of those who couldn't defend themselves. Guardian Angel's final mission was complete. The neighborhood around Maple Street began to return to a new kind of normal, forever changed by the afternoon when a pregnant woman with a rifle stood between terror and innocence, choosing to protect children she had never met because protecting children was what mothers did. The FBI arrived within 40 minutes of the last shot. Black SUVs with government plates flooding Maple Street like a federal invasion of suburban normalcy. Sarah watched them through her nursery window while folding the baby clothes she had abandoned when the crisis began, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Agent Jennifer Martinez was the first to knock on her door, a woman in her early 40s with the kind of sharp intelligence that suggested rapid advancement through federal law enforcement ranks. She introduced herself with professional courtesy, tinged by genuine curiosity about the pregnant civilian who had eliminated an entire terrorist cell from a second-story nursery. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. We need to debrief you about today's incident." Sarah invited her inside, noting how the agent's eyes automatically cataloged the house's layout, weapon storage possibilities, and tactical advantages. Professional habit, Sarah recognized. The same kind of environmental assessment she performed instinctively in any new location. They sat in the living room, where Danny's law books shared shelf space with Sarah's military memorabilia and pregnancy guides. The juxtaposition seemed to capture the complexity of her current existence: former warrior, expectant mother, suburban homeowner who had just conducted precision counter-terrorism operations from her baby's nursery. "Tell me what you observed," Agent Martinez said, activating a digital recorder with Sarah's permission. "Start from the beginning." Sarah recounted the afternoon's events with the detailed precision her military training had ingrained. Target identification, range estimation, environmental conditions, tactical assessment, rules of engagement decisions. She spoke in the clipped, professional cadence that came automatically when discussing combat operations, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of describing 8 confirmed kills. Agent Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, but mostly focusing on Sarah's face as if trying to read deeper truths beneath the tactical debriefing. When Sarah finished her account, the agent leaned back in her chair with an expression that mixed professional admiration with personal concern. "Mrs. Chen, you understand that you've just prevented what our preliminary investigation suggests would have been one of the deadliest terrorist attacks on American soil since September 11th. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Emma was shifting with what felt like increased activity. The stress of the afternoon was affecting both of them, flooding their shared circulatory system with chemicals that evolution had designed for fight-or-flight responses, not precision marksmanship while pregnant. "I understand that children were in danger and I was in a position to help," Sarah replied carefully. "My military oath didn't end when I received my discharge papers." Agent Martinez nodded slowly. "The terrorists you eliminated were part of a cell we've been tracking for 8 months. International connections, military-grade equipment, coordination that suggests state sponsorship. They had plans that went far beyond the school attack." She opened a tablet and showed Sarah photographs that made her stomach clench with recognition and rage. Maps of other schools in the district, photographs of children's dismissal routines, detailed floor plans that showed every classroom and emergency exit. This hadn't been a random attack, it had been the first phase of a campaign designed to terrorize entire communities. "We found 12 additional targets in their planning materials," Agent Martinez continued. "Elementary schools, daycare centers, youth sports complexes. They were planning to hit 1 target per week for 3 months, creating a sustained climate of terror that would fundamentally change how Americans think about childhood safety." Sarah felt Emma kick sharply, as if her daughter could sense her mother's emotional response to the revelation. 12 additional targets. Thousands of children who would have faced the same terror as the students at Millbrook Elementary. Families destroyed, communities traumatized, innocence shattered on a scale that would have redefined American society. "Your actions today didn't just save the children in that school," Agent Martinez said quietly. "You dismantled an entire terrorism network and prevented a sustained campaign of violence against children." The weight of that knowledge settled onto Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. In Afghanistan, she had often wondered about the ripple effects of her actions, the attacks prevented, the lives saved, the chain reactions of violence interrupted by precision intervention. Now she knew with statistical certainty that 8 trigger pulls had prevented thousands of casualties. Her phone buzzed with another call from Danny, who was probably racing home from his downtown law office, frantic with worry and confusion about the news reports he was undoubtedly monitoring. Sarah let it ring while Agent Martinez continued her briefing. "The media attention is going to be intense," the agent warned. "Pregnant sniper prevents school massacre. It's the kind of story that captures national imagination. We can provide security and media management support, but ultimately you're going to become a public figure whether you want to or not." Sarah considered this reality while watching through her window as news trucks began assembling on Maple Street. Camera crews were setting up broadcast positions. Reporters were interviewing neighbors. The quiet suburban neighborhood was transforming into a media circus focused on the house where Guardian Angel had made her final stand. "There's something else," Agent Martinez said, her voice taking on a different tone. "The terrorists had real-time intelligence about police response protocols. They knew exactly how long it would take SWAT teams to establish perimeter positions, how long clearance operations would require, when helicopter support would arrive. Someone was feeding them information about law enforcement capabilities." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. A mole in local law enforcement, or state police, or federal agencies. Someone sworn to protect and serve had been providing intelligence to terrorists planning mass casualties against children. The betrayal was almost worse than the original attack, a violation of trust that cut to the heart of everything she had sworn to defend. "That's why your intervention was so crucial," Agent Martinez continued. "The terrorists were counting on having sufficient time to complete their mission before effective response could be mounted. They had planned for everything except a military-trained sniper operating from a concealed position outside their operational parameters." The doorbell rang, followed by the sound of Danny's key in the front lock. Sarah heard his voice calling her name with the kind of desperate relief that came from fearing the worst and discovering survival instead. She excused herself from the briefing to meet him in the hallway, where he wrapped her in his arms with careful attention to her pregnant belly. "Thank God," he whispered against her hair. "When I heard about sniper fire and realized what you had done, I thought I might lose both of you." "We're fine," Sarah assured him, though she knew that fine was a relative term that would need redefinition in light of the afternoon's events. "Emma's been kicking like crazy, but we're both physically unharmed." Danny pulled back to look at her face, his attorney's eye reading the emotional cost that wasn't visible in her tactical debriefing. "How many?" "8 confirmed," Sarah said. Simply, there was no point in euphemism or emotional cushioning. Danny needed to understand the reality they were facing, the legal and political complications that would follow her actions. He closed his eyes for a moment, processing the magnitude of what his pregnant wife had done from their baby's nursery. When he opened them again, Sarah saw love and pride mixed with fear about the future they would have to navigate together. "We'll handle whatever comes next," he said firmly. "Together." Agent Martinez was waiting in the living room when they returned, her expression suggesting that the briefing was far from over. She had been monitoring radio communications during Sarah's reunion with Danny, and new information was coming in from the investigation teams processing the terrorist attack. "The explosive devices you prevented them from detonating would have brought down the entire building," she reported. "Military-grade charges positioned to collapse main structural supports. If they had succeeded, we would be looking at casualty numbers in the hundreds." Sarah sank into her chair, the full weight of the afternoon's consequences finally hitting her. She had killed 8 people, but those 8 deaths had prevented what could have been the deadliest single incident of domestic terrorism in American history. The mathematics of violence were cruel but undeniable. "There's going to be a joint FBI State Police investigation," Agent Martinez continued. "Congressional hearings about domestic terrorism preparedness, questions about civilian intervention in active shooter situations, policy discussions about rules of engagement for non-law enforcement personnel." Sarah listened while mentally preparing for the political storm that would follow. Her actions had saved lives, but they had also raised complex questions about the role of armed civilians in counterterrorism operations. Politicians would use her story to advance various agendas, turning her into a symbol for debates about gun rights, military training, homeland security, and the limits of civilian authority. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked, her military training asserting itself over emotional exhaustion. "Complete cooperation with the investigation, detailed debriefing about your tactical decision-making process, and patience while we sort through the legal implications," Agent Martinez replied. "This is unprecedented territory, a pregnant civilian, conducting precision counterterrorism operations on American soil." The phone rang again, and this time Sarah recognized the number, her parents' restaurant in San Francisco. News of the school attack and her involvement had apparently reached the West Coast, carried by the 24-hour news cycle that would make her story national news within hours. She answered on the third ring, preparing herself for the conversation. She had been dreading since pulling the trigger on her first target. "Sarah?" Her mother's voice was tight with worry and confusion. "The news is saying..." "They're saying you were involved in some kind of shooting at a school?" "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah said gently. "The baby's fine. I had to help some children who were in danger." Silence on the other end of the line while Lin Chen processed the implications of her daughter's carefully chosen words. In the background, Sarah could hear the familiar sounds of the restaurant kitchen, the sizzle of stir-fry and the chatter of dinner preparation. Normal life continuing in a world that didn't know how close it had come to catastrophic change. "You were shooting people again," her mother said finally, her voice carrying decades of worry about her daughter's chosen profession. "You promised that was over when you left the military." "I didn't choose this, Mom," Sarah replied, looking through the window at the news trucks and FBI vehicles that had transformed her quiet street into a law enforcement staging area. "But I couldn't let children die when I had the ability to save them." Agent Martinez was monitoring the conversation while simultaneously receiving updates through her radio earpiece. Sarah caught fragments of communication about evidence processing, witness interviews, and coordination with federal agencies that were converging on the investigation. "Mrs. Chen," Agent Martinez said when Sarah ended the call with her parents, "there's one more thing you need to know. The terrorist cell had inside information about your background." Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. "Explain." "They knew about your military service, your sniper training, your address. The attack timing wasn't random, they planned it for a day when most military-age males in the neighborhood would be at work, minimizing the chance of armed civilian intervention." The implications were staggering. The terrorists had not only penetrated law enforcement intelligence networks, but had also conducted detailed surveillance of potential threats in the area around their target. They had identified Sarah as a potential problem and timed their attack to minimize her ability to interfere. Except they had underestimated what a pregnant woman would do to protect children. They made one crucial error in their intelligence assessment. Agent Martinez continued with something that might have been admiration. They assumed that pregnancy would neutralize your operational capabilities. They didn't account for maternal instinct combined with military training. Sarah's hand moved to her belly, where Emma was moving with what felt like approval of her mother's actions. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, but Sarah imagined her daughter somehow understanding that the violence had been necessary, that sometimes guardian angels had to fight monsters to keep innocents safe. The investigation would continue for months, unraveling the full scope of the terrorist network and the security breaches that had enabled their planning. Sarah would be at the center of it all, transformed from private citizen to national figure, from pregnant mother to symbol of civilian heroism in the face of organized terror. But as she sat in her living room, surrounded by federal agents and evidence of how close her community had come to unthinkable tragedy, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion that transcended the legal and political complications ahead. Guardian Angel had answered one final call to duty, protecting the innocent, with precision fire and moral certainty. 8 shots had prevented thousands of casualties, ended a terrorist campaign before it could begin, and ensured that the children of Millbrook Elementary would grow up to tell their own stories, instead of becoming statistics in someone else's tragedy. The revelations continued through the evening as FBI analysts processed intelligence seized from the terrorist safe house. Agent Martinez returned at sunset with updates that painted an even more chilling picture of how close the community had come to sustain terror. They had detailed psychological profiles of target communities, she reported, spreading photographs across Sarah's coffee table. Maps showing optimal attack sequences designed to maximize long-term trauma, timing calculated to ensure media coverage during peak viewing hours. Sarah studied the documents while Danny read over her shoulder, both of them struggling to comprehend the meticulous planning that had gone into terrorizing children. The terrorists hadn't simply wanted to kill, they had wanted to create a sustained climate of fear that would fundamentally alter American society. The school attack was designed to be broadcast live, Agent Martinez continued. They had positioned cameras to capture the assault from multiple angles, planning to stream the footage on social media platforms to maximize psychological impact. Emma kicked sharply inside Sarah's belly, as if protesting the evil being described. In her presence, Sarah rubbed her hand across her stomach, trying to soothe both her daughter and herself as the full magnitude of the prevented atrocity became clear. How many people knew about this investigation? Danny asked, his legal mind focusing on the intelligence breach that had enabled the terrorists' planning. That's what we're trying to determine, Agent Martinez replied grimly. The leak appears to have come from someone with access to both federal counterterrorism databases and local law enforcement communication networks. We're looking at a very small pool of suspects. Sarah's phone had been ringing constantly as news of her involvement spread through military networks, social media, and traditional news outlets. Messages from former Marine Corps colleagues, congratulations. From her old unit, interview requests from national television programs. The story was becoming national news. Pregnant Marine veteran prevents school massacre. She had ignored most of the calls, but one had caught her attention. Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, her former spotter from Afghanistan, calling from his home in Texas where he worked as a police instructor. Guardian Angel, his familiar voice had carried 8 years of shared history and mutual respect. Should have known you'd find a way to save kids even while pregnant. Marcus, Sarah had replied, feeling tears threaten for the first time since the crisis began. How did you hear about this? Military networks are buzzing, he had said. 8 shots, 8 kills, 400 children saved. You haven't lost a step, Angel. The conversation had lasted only a few minutes, but it reminded Sarah that she wasn't alone in carrying the weight of what she had done. There was a community of warriors who understood the burden of taking lives to save others, who recognized the impossible decisions that came with the ability to project precise violence at long range. Now, as Agent Martinez continued her briefing, Sarah felt that community support across the distance. They understood what civilians couldn't, that sometimes the choice wasn't between violence and peace, but between targeted violence and mass casualties, between controlled application of force and uncontrolled slaughter of innocents. The President has been briefed, Agent Martinez said, pulling Sarah's attention back to the immediate situation. There will likely be some form of federal recognition for your actions, possibly a civilian medal for heroism. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. 8 months ago, she had been looking forward to a quiet retirement from military service, anticipating the peaceful challenges of motherhood and suburban life. Now she was being considered for federal medals while sitting in a nursery surrounded by baby clothes and FBI evidence files. I don't want recognition, Sarah said firmly. "I want those children to grow up safe, and I want whoever leaked intelligence to terrorists to face justice." Agent Martinez nodded with understanding that suggested she had expected this response. "The investigation into the intelligence breach is our top priority. We have forensic accountants examining financial records, cyber specialists analyzing communication networks, and internal affairs conducting polygraph examinations of everyone, with access to relevant databases." Through the nursery window, Sarah could see the media encampment that had established itself on Maple Street. News trucks from national networks, reporters doing stand-up broadcasts, satellite uplinks transforming her quiet neighborhood into a temporary media city. The story was too compelling to ignore. Pregnant woman, military training, precision shooting, children saved. "The attention is going to be intense," Agent Martinez warned again. "Your story touches multiple national conversations: gun rights, military service, homeland security, the role of civilians in counterterrorism. Everyone will want to use you as a symbol for their particular cause." Sarah understood the political reality even as she resented it. Her actions would be analyzed and debated, her motives questioned and praised, her story transformed into whatever narrative various interests wanted to promote. The simple truth that she had seen children in danger and acted to protect them would be lost in the complexity of competing agendas. "What happens to the families of the terrorists?" Danny asked, his attorney's perspective focusing on legal implications that extended beyond the immediate crisis. "That's complicated," Agent Martinez admitted. "Some appear to have been genuine family members unaware of the cell's activities. Others were clearly part of the support network. We're working with immigration authorities and international intelligence services to sort through the relationships." Sarah thought about the children of terrorists, innocents who would grow up marked by their parents' choices, carrying the burden of association with unthinkable evil. Violence created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate targets, affecting families and communities in ways that could last generations. Emma moved again inside her belly, a gentle reminder of the new life growing despite the afternoons. Death and destruction. Sarah imagined her daughter's future, the world she would inherit, the story she would hear about the day her mother stopped a terrorist attack while she developed in the womb. "There's one more thing," Agent Martinez said, her voice taking on a different tone. "The terrorist cell had contingency plans if their school attacks were unsuccessful. Secondary targets included shopping malls, movie theaters, youth sports complex, as anywhere large numbers of children and families gathered." Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest as the full scope of the prevented campaign became clear. The 8 terrorists she had eliminated hadn't just been planning a single attack. They had been preparing for months of sustained terror, designed to make American parents afraid to send their children anywhere that offered normal childhood experiences. "Your intervention didn't just save the children in that school," Agent Martinez continued. "You dismantled an entire terrorism infrastructure and prevented what could have been a fundamental change in how Americans live their daily lives." The weight of that knowledge was almost crushing. Sarah had pulled the trigger 8 times in defense of children she could see through her scope, but the consequences extended to thousands of families she would never meet, children who would grow up free from the terror that had been planned for them. Danny reached over to take her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support that grounded her in the present moment. Whatever came next, investigations, hearings, media attention, legal proceedings, they would face it together as a family that included the daughter growing inside her. "Mrs. Chen," Agent Martinez said as she prepared to leave, "I want you to know that what you did today represents the very best of American values. You saw evil threatening innocence, and you acted with courage and precision to stop it. That's heroism in its purest form." After the FBI agent left, Sarah and Danny sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the distant sounds of news crews and emergency vehicles that continued to process the scene across the street. The school building stood silhouetted against the evening sky, its windows dark but its structure intact, ready to welcome children back when trauma counselors and security experts determined it was safe. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Thank you for saving my daughter. She's the little girl in the red sweater. We will never forget what you did today." Tears came finally, releasing the emotional pressure that Sarah had contained during hours of tactical assessment and federal debriefing. She cried for the children who had faced terror, for the families of terrorists whose lives would be forever marked by their relatives' choices, for the weight of taking 8 lives even in defense of innocence. But mostly she cried with relief that the little girl in the red sweater would go home to her family tonight. That 400 children would wake up tomorrow morning in their own beds, instead of becoming statistics in another American tragedy. Guardian Angel had answered her final call to duty, protecting the innocent with precision fire and moral certainty. 8 shots had prevented thousands of casualties, ended a terrorist campaign before it could begin, and ensured that childhood in America would remain possible rather than becoming a constant state of fear. Emma kicked gently inside her belly, as if acknowledging that the danger had passed and the future was secure. Sarah smiled through her tears, imagining her daughter's childhood in a world where guardian angels stood watch from unexpected places, where ordinary people were capable of extraordinary heroism when innocence needed protection. 3 weeks after the shooting, Sarah received a visit from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery. The doctor came not in any official capacity, but as the mother of Miguel Vasquez, the 6-year-old boy in the superhero t-shirt whom Sarah had saved during her 5th shot. "Miguel has been asking about the guardian angel," Dr. Vasquez explained, as they sat in Sarah's living room, which had finally returned to normal after weeks of FBI interviews and media attention. "He knows someone protected him that day, but he doesn't understand who or how." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Emma was now noticeably larger and more active. 7 months pregnant, she was entering the final phase of a pregnancy that had been irrevocably marked by violence and heroism in equal measure. "What does he need to know?" Sarah asked carefully. As the weeks had passed, she had thought often about the children who had witnessed the attack, wondering how their young minds were processing the trauma and their miraculous survival. "He needs to understand that good people exist," Dr. Vasquez replied. "That when evil threatens children, there are adults who will risk everything to protect them. Miguel is struggling with nightmares, but he's also demonstrating remarkable resilience. He talks about becoming a protector when he grows up." Through the window, Sarah could see Millbrook Elementary across the street, its windows replaced and its facade repaired. The school had reopened the previous week with enhanced security measures and a full-time counseling staff. Children were returning to normal routines, though the building would forever carry the invisible scars of the afternoon when terror had invaded their sanctuary. Dr. Vasquez pulled an envelope from her purse. "Miguel drew this for you. He doesn't know your name or what you look like, but he wanted to thank the guardian angel who saved his class." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling fingers, revealing a crayon drawing that made her breath catch. In her throat, a stick figure in a cape stood on top of a house, holding what was unmistakably meant to be a rifle, with a line drawn from the weapon to a school building where small figures represented children. Above the guardian angel figure, Miguel had written in careful first-grade letters, "Thank you for saving us." The drawing was simple but profound, capturing the essential truth of what had happened that day better than any FBI report or news article. A child's understanding of good versus evil, protection versus harm, the existence of guardian angels who stood watch when monsters threatened innocence. "He wants to meet you," Dr. Vasquez said gently. "Not for therapy or publicity, but because he believes you're a real angel and he wants to thank you properly." Sarah studied the drawing, remembering the terrified little boy crawling under kindergarten desks while a terrorist with an AR-15 tracked his movement. The shot she had taken to save him had been one of the most difficult of her career, close enough to the child that any error would have been catastrophic, through furniture and debris that could have deflected the bullet's path. "I'm not an angel," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just a mother who couldn't stand by while children were murdered." "That's exactly what Miguel needs to hear," Dr. Vasquez replied. "That ordinary people can do extraordinary things when children need protection. That there are adults in the world who will risk everything to keep kids safe." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday, in Sarah's backyard, where the autumn colors provided a peaceful backdrop for a conversation between a pregnant veteran and a 6-year-old survivor. Miguel arrived with his parents, a quiet boy with serious eyes that seemed older than his years. He approached Sarah with the careful politeness of a child who had learned that the adult world contained both angels and monsters. When she knelt down to his level as much as her pregnancy allowed, he studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile reality with imagination. "You're the guardian angel," he said finally, not a question but a statement of confirmed belief. "I'm Sarah," she replied gently. "I'm going to be a mom soon, and when I saw that bad man trying to hurt you and your friends, I had to stop him." Miguel nodded with the serious acceptance that children bring to explanations of adult complexity. "My mom says you used to be a soldier and you know how to protect people." "That's right," Sarah confirmed. "And now I'm going to teach my daughter how to protect people too when she grows up." "Is she going to be a guardian angel like you?" Sarah's hand moved to her belly, where Emma was responding to the conversation with increased movement. "She's going to be whatever she chooses to be. But I'll make sure she knows that good people have a responsibility to protect others when they can." The conversation lasted only 15 minutes, but it provided closure that neither Sarah nor Miguel had realized they needed. He gave her another drawing, this one showing a pregnant woman holding hands with a little girl, both wearing capes, before returning to his parents with the satisfaction of having properly thanked his rescuer. Dr. Vasquez lingered after Miguel's family left, sharing observations about trauma recovery that would stay with Sarah for years to come. "Children are remarkably resilient," she explained, "but they need to see evidence that the world contains more good than evil. Your actions that day didn't just save lives, they preserved faith in the fundamental decency of human nature." The psychological impact of the prevented attack extended far beyond the immediate victims. Studies conducted by the Department of Homeland Security in the months following the incident showed significant changes in how Americans viewed domestic terrorism threats and civilian response capabilities. Sarah learned about these studies through Agent Martinez, who had become something of a friend during the extended investigation that followed the shooting. The agent visited regularly, partly for official follow-up, but mostly to check on Sarah's emotional well-being as her pregnancy progressed. The terrorists succeeded in one of their objectives, Agent Martinez reported during one of these visits. They wanted to change how Americans think about childhood safety, and they did. But not in the way they intended. Public opinion polling showed increased support for military-style training for civilians, enhanced school security measures, and what researchers termed guardian angel protocols, systematic approaches to identifying and empowering qualified individuals who could respond to active shooter situations. "Your story has become a case study in effective civilian intervention," Agent Martinez continued. "Military academies are teaching it as an example of proper tactical decision-making under extreme stress. Police departments are using it to train officers in coordinating with armed civilians during crisis situations." Sarah felt conflicted about her transformation into a symbol and case study. She had acted instinctively to protect children, drawing on military training to address an immediate threat. The broader implications, policy changes, training protocols, National security discussions had been the furthest thing from her mind when she centered her crosshairs on that first terrorist. But as her pregnancy advanced and Emma's birth approached, Sarah began to understand that her actions had created something larger than personal heroism. She had demonstrated that ordinary citizens could serve as guardians of their communities, that military training retained its value even after formal service ended, that mothers would go to extraordinary lengths to protect children. The congressional hearing came in her 8th month of pregnancy, when air travel was no longer safe, but her testimony was considered essential to understanding the incident's broader implications. Sarah appeared via video link from a federal building in Boston, her visibly pregnant silhouette providing a stark visual reminder of the circumstances under which she had conducted precision counter-terrorism operations. Representative Sarah Williams, a former teacher who chaired the House Subcommittee on Domestic Security, led the questioning with obvious respect for Sarah's actions and circumstances. Mrs. Chen, your military training enabled you to save hundreds of lives while risking your own safety and that of your unborn child. What should Congress consider as we examine policies regarding civilian intervention in terrorist attacks? Sarah had prepared for this question during weeks of consultation with legal experts and military advisors. Her answer would influence national policy for years to come. Representative Williams, I believe we must recognize that in crisis situations, formal response protocols may be insufficient to prevent mass casualties. Qualified individuals with appropriate training should have clear legal protection when they act to save lives, particularly when children are threatened. But how do we distinguish between qualified intervention and vigilante justice? Military training, law enforcement experience, demonstrated competency with precision weapons, and clear evidence of imminent threat to innocent life, Sarah replied. The same standards we apply to off-duty police officers who intervene in crimes. The hearing lasted 3 hours, covering everything from rules of engagement to the psychological impact of justified killings. Sarah answered each question with the measured precision that military service had taught her, aware that her words would be quoted in legal briefs and policy documents for decades. But the moment that received the most media attention came at the hearing's end, when Representative Williams asked about the personal cost of her actions. Mrs. Chen, you've become a national hero, but you also took 8 lives while pregnant with your first child. How do you reconcile the violence you employed with the life you're bringing into the world? Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling Emma's strong kicks as if her daughter were trying to participate in the conversation. The question struck at the heart of her internal struggle, the tension between warrior and mother, between the violence necessary to protect innocence and the peace required to nurture new life. Representative Williams, I believe that my daughter will be born into a safer world because sometimes good people are willing to do difficult things to protect children. Emma will grow up knowing that when evil threatens innocence, there are guardian angels who stand watch. She paused, gathering her thoughts for words that would define her legacy. I didn't choose to become a symbol or a case study. I simply chose to protect children when I had the ability to do so. That's what mothers do. We protect our young and everyone else's young when they're threatened. The violence I employed was in service of preserving peace for the next generation. The hearing room fell silent as representatives and spectators absorbed the weight of her words. Sarah had articulated something fundamental about maternal instinct, civic duty, and the moral complexity of violence in defense of innocence. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's testimony was quoted in editorials, analyzed in academic papers, and referenced in military training materials. She had become more than a hero. She had become a voice for the principle that ordinary citizens have extraordinary responsibilities when evil threatens their communities. But for Sarah, the most meaningful response came from a different source entirely. 3 days after the congressional hearing, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden angel, hand-carved with exquisite detail, holding a tiny rifle and standing guard over a group of children. The accompanying note was written in a child's careful handwriting. For the real guardian angel, from all the kids at Millbrook Elementary. Sarah placed the carved angel on the nursery windowsill, where it could stand watch over the street where children walked safely to school each morning. As her due date approached, she often found herself looking at the figurine while feeling Emma's movements inside her belly, thinking about the legacy she was passing to her daughter. Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had been a warrior who became a guardian, that sometimes ordinary people were called upon to do extraordinary things in defense of innocence. She would understand that with great capability came great responsibility, that military training was a tool for protecting others rather than harming them. Most importantly, Emma would grow up in a community that had seen evil defeated by precision, fire, and moral courage, where children could attend school safely because guardian angels stood watch from unexpected places. The investigation into the intelligence leak that had enabled the terrorist planning was finally resolved in Sarah's 9th month of pregnancy. Agent Martinez delivered the news personally, her expression mixing satisfaction with professional disappointment. "We found our mole," she announced as they sat in the nursery, surrounded by completed preparations for Emma's arrival. Detective Lieutenant Robert Nash, State Police Tactical Communications. 23-year veteran, decorated officer, no apparent ideological motivation. Money? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Betraying children's safety for financial gain seemed somehow worse than ideological extremism. Gambling debts? Agent Martinez confirmed. He owed substantial money to organized crime figures who were being paid by international terrorism networks. Nash provided police response protocols, tactical capabilities assessments, and specific intelligence about potential civilian threats in target areas. The betrayal was even worse than Sarah had imagined. A veteran police officer, sworn to protect and serve, had sold information that would have enabled the murder of hundreds of children. Nash's intelligence had identified Sarah as a potential threat to the terrorist operation, but he had underestimated what a pregnant woman would do to protect innocents. "What's his sentence?" Danny asked from the doorway, where he had been listening, while reviewing case files for his own legal practice. "Life without parole," Agent Martinez replied. 8 counts of conspiracy to commit terrorism, accessory to attempted mass murder, treason. He'll die in federal prison. Sarah felt no satisfaction at Nash's fate, only sadness that someone sworn to protect children had chosen to betray them for money. The corruption of trust was almost as devastating as the original terrorist threat, a reminder that evil could hide behind badges and uniforms as easily as in foreign terrorist cells. "There's something else," Agent Martinez continued. Nash's cooperation with the investigation revealed additional terrorist cells operating in other states. "Your actions that day didn't just prevent one attack. They exposed an entire network that was planning similar operations nationwide." The scope of the prevented catastrophe continued to expand with each new revelation. Sarah's 8 shots had disrupted terrorism operations that extended across multiple states, potentially saving thousands of lives and dozens of communities. The pregnant woman folding baby clothes in a suburban nursery had inadvertently become the key factor in dismantling a national terrorism network. As Emma's due date approached, Sarah found herself thinking often about the world her daughter would inherit. It would be a world marked by the afternoon when terror had invaded Millbrook Elementary, but also a world where that terror had been defeated by precision fire and moral courage. Emma would grow up in a community that had learned the value of vigilance without surrendering to fear, that had seen ordinary citizens rise to extraordinary challenges when children needed protection. She would understand that safety was not guaranteed, but was preserved by the willingness of good people to stand guard against evil. Most importantly, Emma would know that her mother had been both warrior and guardian, that the same hands that fed her bottles and changed her diapers had once held a rifle in defense of innocence. She would understand that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but complementary virtues, that the ability to project violence in defense of others was a sacred trust. The carved angel stood watch on the nursery windowsill as Sarah prepared for motherhood, a reminder that guardian angels came in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never asked to be heroes. Emma Rose Chen was born on a quiet Tuesday morning in November, her arrival marked by none of the drama that had defined her mother's pregnancy. Sarah held her daughter for the first time in the same hospital where some of the Millbrook elementary staff had been treated for shock and minor injuries, the circle of that day's consequences finally closing with new life rather than remembered death. Danny cried when he first saw Emma's face, the emotional release of months spent worrying about both his wife and daughter, finally expressing itself in tears of joy and relief. The baby was perfect, 8 pounds 2 ounces, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in the world with unusual attention. "She's going to be strong," the obstetrician observed as Emma gripped her finger with surprising force. Like her mother. In the weeks that followed Emma's birth, Sarah discovered that motherhood brought its own form of vigilance. She found herself automatically assessing potential threats in everyday situations, positioning the stroller to provide cover from traffic, choosing restaurant seats with clear sight lines to exits, teaching Danny to vary their daily routines. To avoid predictable patterns, the habits of a warrior didn't disappear with the transition to motherhood. They evolved to encompass a different kind of protection mission. Sarah was still guardian angel, but now her primary responsibility was a 7-pound infant who depended entirely on her parents for safety and survival. The media attention gradually faded as other stories captured public interest, but Sarah's actions continued to influence policy and training at multiple levels of government. The Chen Protocol became standard instruction in federal law enforcement academies, a framework for coordinating with qualified armed civilians during active shooter incidents military veterans organizations used Sarah's story as an example of how service members could continue protecting their communities after discharge, encouraging former soldiers to maintain their skills and remain prepared for emergency response. The message was clear. The oath to defend the innocent didn't end with retirement from active duty. Sarah received hundreds of letters from children, parents, teachers, and fellow veterans. Many came from other mothers who wrote to express their gratitude and support. One letter from a teacher in Texas captured the sentiment that had made Sarah's story resonate so broadly. "Mrs. Chen, you did what every mother dreams of being able to do, protected children who weren't your own as if they were your own. You proved that maternal instinct combined with proper training can overcome any threat to innocent life. Thank you for showing us that guardian angels are real." But the letter that meant the most came from an unexpected source, the mother of one of the terrorists Sarah had killed. Written in careful English that suggested a non-native speaker struggling with complex emotions, it arrived when Emma was 3 months old. "Mrs. Chen, my son Ahmad was one of the men you killed at the school. I want you to know that I am grateful you stopped him. The boy I raised would never have hurt children. Something evil took control of his mind and turned him into a monster. You gave him a quick death instead of a lifetime in prison, remembering what he almost did. You saved his victims and you ended his suffering. Thank you for being stronger than my son's evil. I pray that Allah forgives him and that you find peace knowing you did what was necessary." Sarah read the letter while nursing Emma in the nursery, tears flowing freely as she contemplated the complex aftermath of justified violence. Even among the families of terrorists, there were people who understood that some actions, however violent, served the cause of justice and protection. She kept the letter in Emma's baby book, alongside Miguel's drawings and newspaper clippings about the prevented attack. Someday, when Emma was old enough to understand, Sarah would share these documents as part of explaining her mother's choice to use deadly force in defense of children. The first anniversary of the Millbrook Elementary attack was marked by a community memorial service that Sarah initially tried to avoid. The attention still made her uncomfortable, and she preferred to remember the day privately rather than as part of a public ceremony. But Miguel Vasquez changed her mind with a personal invitation, delivered in another crayon drawing. This one showed the carved angel from Sarah's windowsill standing guard over a playground full of children, with the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe," written in increasingly confident handwriting. The memorial service was held on the school playground, transformed for the afternoon into a celebration of survival and resilience. Children who had been trapped in classrooms a year earlier played freely while their parents watched with the heightened appreciation that comes from nearly losing everything precious. Sarah attended with Emma in a carrier against her chest. 7-month-old baby, providing a living symbol of hope and continuity. When called upon to speak, Sarah's words were brief but deeply felt. A year ago, evil came to this school intending to destroy innocence and create fear, she said to the assembled crowd of families, first responders, and community members. Instead, this community proved that good people will always stand together to protect children. You proved that love is stronger than hate, that courage defeats terror, that guardian angels exist when children need them most. She paused, looking out at the faces of children who were growing up free from the trauma that had been planned for them. Emma won't remember this day, but she grew up in a community that showed her mother what real heroism looks like. Teachers who shielded their students, first responders who risked their lives, neighbors who opened their homes to strangers, and children who helped each other through the worst day of their young lives. After the ceremony, dozens of families approached to thank Sarah personally, but the encounter that stayed with her came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor who had been gardening during the attack, took Sarah's hands. With tears in her eyes, "I've lived in this neighborhood for 43 years, she said quietly. "I've watched children grow up here, seen families come and go, witnessed all the ordinary miracles of suburban life. But I never imagined I'd see someone sacrifice everything to save children she'd never met. You remind me why I still believe in human goodness." As Emma grew through her first year, Sarah found herself frequently returning to the nursery window, where she had made the most important shots of her life. The view across to Millbrook Elementary remained the same, but everything had changed. Children walked to school safely each morning, protected by enhanced security measures, but more importantly by a community that had learned the value of vigilance and preparedness. That the wooden angel still stood guard on the windowsill, now joined by other gifts from grateful families, a small American flag from Miguel's class, a handwritten thank you note from the teacher Sarah had seen in the first classroom, a photograph of the school's new memorial garden, where flowers bloomed in memory of the terror that had been prevented. Sarah had created a ritual of standing at that window each morning while Emma napped, watching children arrive at school and remembering the afternoon when guardian angel had answered her final call to duty. The memories were bittersweet pride in the lives saved, balanced against the weight of the lives taken. Satisfaction in duty fulfilled, tempered by sadness that such duty had been necessary. But as she watched Emma sleep peacefully in the crib that had been surrounded by baby clothes when terror struck, Sarah felt deep gratitude for the world her daughter was inheriting. It was a world where evil existed and sometimes threatened innocence, but it was also a world where ordinary people were capable of extraordinary heroism when children needed protection. Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had been a guardian angel, that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never asked to be heroes, that the willingness to stand watch over innocence was among the highest forms of service to humanity. The future stretched ahead with all its uncertainties and possibilities, But Sarah faced it with the quiet confidence of someone who had looked evil in the eye and emerged victorious. Guardian Angel was officially retired, but the spirit that had guided those 8 precise shots would live on in the next generation, in a daughter who would learn that, with great capability came great responsibility, that military training was a tool for protecting others, and that sometimes ordinary mothers became extraordinary guardians when children needed them most. 5 years after the shots that changed everything, Emma Rose Chun was building block towers in the same nursery where her mother had saved 400 children. The room looked different now, walls painted in cheerful yellows and blues, shelves filled with picture books and stuffed animals instead of military equipment, but the window still faced Millbrook Elementary, where children arrive each morning. Under the watchful protection of enhanced security and community vigilance. Emma was bright and curious, with her mother's steady gaze and her father's gentle temperament. At 5 years old, she knew her mother had been a soldier and had done something very important before she was born, but the full story would wait until she was older, more capable of understanding the complex relationship between violence and protection, between guardian angels and the monsters they sometimes had to fight. Sarah worked now as a consultant for the Department of Homeland Security, developing training protocols for civilian response to active shooter situations. Her expertise was in demand across the country as communities struggled to balance security with normalcy, preparation with peace of mind. She traveled frequently, speaking at conferences and training sessions, but always returned home to the house on Maple Street where Guardian Angel had made her final stand. Danny's law practice had evolved to include pro bono work for military, families and survivors of domestic terrorism. He had become an expert in the legal framework surrounding civilian intervention in crisis situations, his expertise shaped by intimate knowledge of the personal costs such interventions carried. Together, he and Sarah had created a life that honored both the warrior she had been and the guardian she remained. The carved angel still stood on the nursery windowsill, now one of many tokens of gratitude that families had sent over the years. Sarah had tried repeatedly to donate them to museums or memorial sites, but Emma had insisted they stay in her room, telling her parents that the angel needed to keep watching over the school children. Miguel Vasquez was now 11 years old, a serious boy who excelled in mathematics and had announced his intention to become a police officer when he grew up. His family sent Sarah a Christmas card each year, updating her on his progress and thanking her again for the gift of his continued existence. In his most recent card, Miguel had written, "I still remember the guardian angel who saved us. I want to be a guardian too when I grow up." Dr. Elena Vasquez had published a study on long-term trauma recovery among the Millbrook Elementary survivors, documenting remarkably positive outcomes that she attributed partly to the children's understanding that they had been protected by real guardian angels. The knowledge that good people existed who would risk everything to save children had provided a foundation of security that helped them process and overcome their traumatic experiences. The school itself had been renovated with state-of-the-art security systems, but more importantly, it had become a model for community engagement in child protection. Parent volunteers received basic training in threat assessment, teachers practiced lockdown procedures monthly, and local law enforcement maintained regular presence during school hours. Most significantly, a network of military veterans in the area had organized informal protection protocols, ensuring that qualified individuals were always within rapid response distance of all local schools. They called themselves Guardian Angels, and their patches bore the image of a rifle-wielding angel standing watch over children. Inspired by Miguel's original drawing of Sarah, Agent Jennifer Martinez had been promoted to head the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Prevention Unit, a position that allowed her to implement many of the lessons learned from the Millbrook Elementary incident. The Chen Protocol had been refined and expanded, creating systematic approaches for identifying and coordinating with qualified armed civilians during crisis situations. Your actions that day saved more than just those 400 children, Martinez told Sarah during one of her periodic visits. They proved that ordinary citizens could serve as effective force multipliers in counter-terrorism operations. We've prevented 12 other attacks by applying the principles your intervention demonstrated. The broader impact of Sarah's actions continued to ripple through American society in ways both obvious and subtle. Military recruitment had increased among women, particularly those interested in precision marksmanship training. Civilian shooting sports programs had expanded, with many participants explicitly motivated by the desire to protect their communities if such skills were ever needed. Gun rights advocates pointed to Sarah's story as evidence that qualified civilians should have access to military-grade weapons for community protection. Gun control advocates argued that the incident proved the need for better screening and training requirements for civilian gun ownership. Both sides claimed her as a symbol while missing the larger truth she represented, that with great capability came great responsibility, regardless of one's political affiliation. Sarah tried to stay above these political debates, focusing instead on the practical work of improving community preparedness and civilian response capabilities. Her message was consistent across all forums. Protecting children was everyone's responsibility. Military training was a tool for serving others, and ordinary people were capable of extraordinary heroism when circumstances demanded it. The 10th anniversary of the attack brought national media attention back to Millbrook Elementary, now renamed the Sarah Chen School for Community Safety. Sarah had objected to the naming, but the school board had overruled her protests, arguing that her story needed to be preserved for future generations. The anniversary ceremony was held in the school's new memorial garden, where flowers bloomed around a bronze statue of a mother holding a child while looking toward the horizon. The inscription read simply, "In memory of terror prevented and innocence preserved by ordinary people doing extraordinary things." Emma, now 10 years old and finally old enough to understand the full story, stood beside her mother as speakers recounted the events of that October afternoon. She listened with the serious attention of a child learning about her family's history, asking thoughtful questions about motivation and consequence. "Mom," she whispered during the ceremony, "were you scared when you had to shoot the bad men?" "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied honestly. "I was terrified. But sometimes being scared doesn't matter when children need protection. Would you do it again?" Sarah looked out at the crowd of families celebrating survival and resilience, at children who were growing up free from the trauma that had been planned for them, at a community that had learned to balance vigilance with hope. If children were in danger and I had the ability to help them, yes, Emma, I would do it again. After the ceremony, Sarah took Emma to visit the memorial wall where photographs of the 8 prevented victims were displayed, not the terrorists, but the children and staff who would have died if the attack had succeeded. The wall served as a reminder of lives preserved rather than lives lost, hope sustained rather than innocence destroyed. Miguel Vasquez approached them at the memorial wall, now 16 and taller than Sarah, but still carrying the serious demeanor of someone who had seen evil at close range and lived to remember the guardian angels who defeated it. "Mrs. Chen," he said with teenage formality, "I wanted Emma to know that her mom is the reason I got to grow up and graduate high school next year." Emma looked between Miguel and her mother, finally understanding the full weight of the choice Sarah had made that October afternoon. Her mother hadn't just been a soldier following orders or a police officer doing her job. She had been a pregnant civilian who chose to risk everything to save children she had never met. "Are you proud of her?" Emma asked Miguel directly. "Every day," he replied. "And not just for what she did that day, but for everything she's done since, teaching people how to protect kids, helping communities be safer, showing everyone that guardian angels are real." As they walked home across Maple Street, Emma asked the question Sarah had been anticipating for years. "Will you teach me how to shoot?" Sarah stopped walking and knelt down to her daughter's level, looking into eyes that carried the same serious intensity she recognized in her own reflection. "Emma, shooting is a skill that requires tremendous responsibility. It's not about power or violence. It's about the ability to protect others when they can't protect themselves. If you want to learn, we'll start with safety, discipline, and understanding that every shot carries the weight of consequence. I want to be a guardian angel too," Emma said simply. "Like you." Sarah felt tears threatening as she realized that her daughter had internalized the most important lesson of the Millbrook Elementary incident, that with great capability came great responsibility, that military skills were tools for protecting others, and that sometimes ordinary people were called upon to do extraordinary things in defense of innocence. "Then we'll start training next weekend," Sarah said, hugging her daughter against her chest. "But remember, being a guardian angel isn't about the weapon you carry. It's about the choice to stand watch over others when they need protection." 15 years after the attack, Emma graduated from the United States Naval Academy with honors, specializing in precision marksmanship and military intelligence. Her senior thesis examined civilian intervention in domestic terrorism incidents, using her mother's actions as a case study in effective decision-making under extreme stress. Sarah and Danny attended the graduation ceremony with tears of pride and apprehension, knowing that their daughter was choosing to follow the path of service that had defined Sarah's early life. But Emma had learned from her mother's experience, understanding that military service was not about glory or adventure, but about the solemn responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. During the commissioning ceremony, Emma recited the oath of office while looking directly at her mother, her voice steady as she swore to defend the Constitution and protect American citizens against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sarah saw in her daughter's eyes the same sense of purpose that had driven her own military service, tempered by the wisdom that came from growing up understanding the true cost of violence in defense of others. After graduation, Emma was assigned to a specialized unit that provided precision marksmanship support for counter-terrorism operations. Her first deployment took her to regions where children lived under the constant threat of violence, where schools were targets and playgrounds were battlefields. In her letters home, Emma wrote about the children she was protecting, echoing the themes that had shaped her mother's service. "Mom, I understand now why you did what you did that day. When you see children threatened by evil, everything else becomes simple. You protect them, whatever the cost, because that's what guardian angels do." 20 years after the Millbrook Elementary incident, Sarah was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer, the kind of battle that required different courage than facing terrorists with rifles. During her treatment, she received thousands of cards and letters from people whose lives had been touched by her story, reminding her that guardian angels were never truly alone. Miguel Vasquez, now a police detective specializing in school safety, organized a support network of all the Millbrook Elementary survivors, creating a community of people united by their shared experience of being protected by an unlikely guardian angel. They took turns visiting Sarah during her chemotherapy sessions, sharing stories of their lives and families, proving that the children she had saved were growing into adults who understood the value of community protection. Emma requested compassionate leave to care for her mother during treatment, bringing military precision to managing appointments and medications while providing the emotional support that only a daughter could offer. During the long hours of waiting in oncology clinics, they talked about the legacy Sarah was leaving, not just the immediate impact of preventing a terrorist attack, but the broader influence on American society's understanding of civilian responsibility and community protection. "You didn't just save those children," Emma told her mother during one particularly difficult treatment session. "You showed an entire generation that ordinary people could serve as guardians of their communities." every veteran who stays trained after discharge, every parent who learns emergency response, every community that organizes civilian protection, they're all following the example you set. Sarah survived the cancer, emerging from treatment with renewed appreciation for the time she had been given and the legacy she would leave. The experience reinforced her understanding that life was precious and fragile, that every day was a gift that should be used in service of protecting others. 20-5 years after the attack, Millbrook Elementary, still officially the Sarah Chen School for Community Safety, held a quarter-century memorial ceremony. Sarah, now 60 years old and officially retired from consulting work, attended with Emma and her new granddaughter, 3-year-old Grace Chen Williams, whose father was a fellow Naval Academy graduate Emma had married 5 years earlier. The ceremony honored not just the prevention of the original attack, but the broader impact Sarah's actions had created. Community protection programs inspired by her example had prevented 17 other potential mass casualty events across the United States. Military veterans had remained engaged in civilian protection efforts long after their discharge. Children had grown up understanding that real guardian angels existed in their communities. Dr. Vasquez, now in her 70s but still active in trauma research, delivered the keynote address about the long-term psychological impact of the incident. Her studies had shown that the Millbrook Elementary survivors demonstrated unusual resilience and civic engagement as adults, many choosing careers in public service, education, and community protection. They grew up knowing that when evil threatens innocence, good people will risk everything to protect children, Dr. Vasquez explained to the assembled crowd. That knowledge gave them a foundation of security that shaped their entire approach to life and citizenship. Miguel Vasquez, now police chief of the surrounding county and a national expert on school safety, introduced Sarah for her remarks to the anniversary gathering. His introduction captured the enduring impact of her actions. 25 years ago, a pregnant woman sitting in a nursery made 8 shots that changed the course of American history. She prevented a massacre, saved 400 lives, and proved that ordinary citizens could serve as extraordinary guardians of their communities. But more than that, she showed us that the oath to protect and serve doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It becomes a way of life that transforms individuals into guardian angels. Sarah's remarks were brief, focusing on the community rather than her own actions. 25 years ago, evil came to our neighborhood intending to destroy innocence and create fear. Instead, this community proved that love is stronger than hate, courage defeats terror, and guardian angels exist when children need them most. The real heroes of that day were the teachers who shielded their students, the first responders who risked their lives, and the children who helped each other through the worst moments of their young lives. She paused, looking out at the multi-generational crowd that included original survivors, their children, and community members who had been inspired by the incident to become guardians themselves. But most importantly, you proved that the choice to protect others is not about military training or special equipment. It's about the decision to stand watch over innocence when evil threatens to destroy it. Every parent who learns emergency response, every neighbor who looks out for other families, every citizen who remains prepared to protect their community, you are all guardian angels carrying forward the legacy of that October afternoon. After the ceremony, Sarah stood once again at her nursery window, now a grandmother's reflection rather than a young mother's preparation. The view across to the school remained unchanged, children walking safely to their education, protected by the enhanced security and community vigilance that had grown from the seeds of that terrible afternoon. Grace played at Sarah's feet with the wooden angel that had stood guard on the windowsill for 25 years, talking to it in the serious way that 3-year-olds addressed important toys. Emma watched her daughter with the same protective intensity Sarah remembered feeling during her own pregnancy. the eternal cycle of maternal vigilance that defined the relationship between mothers and children. "Grandma," Grace said, holding up the carved figure, "Emma told me this is a guardian angel like you. Will I be a guardian angel when I grow up?" Sarah knelt down to her granddaughter's level, looking into eyes that carried the same serious intensity. She recognized Sarah knelt down to her granddaughter's level, looking into eyes that carried the same serious intensity she recognized in her own reflection and Emma's childhood gaze. "Grace, being a guardian angel isn't something you become when you grow up," Sarah said gently, placing her hand over the small fingers that gripped the carved figure. "It's something you choose to be every single day, starting right now." Grace tilted her head with the curiosity of a 3-year-old processing complex concepts. "How do I choose?" "You choose by being kind to other children, by telling grown-ups when someone needs help, by learning to be brave when scary things happen. Guardian angels come in all sizes, sweetheart. Some carry rifles, some carry bandages, some just carry love and courage." Emma smiled from across the room, recognizing her mother's wisdom being passed to the next generation. The cycle was complete, warrior to mother to grandmother, each generation understanding that protection came in many forms, but always required the same fundamental choice to put others before yourself. "Will you teach me to be brave like you, Grandma?" Sarah gathered Grace into her arms, feeling the weight of 25 years of consequence and legacy flowing through this simple moment. The little girl in her embrace represented everything the guardian angel had fought to preserve: innocence protected, futures secured, the endless possibility of childhood continuing safely into adulthood. "I'll teach you everything I know about being brave," Sarah promised. "But the most important lesson is this: real guardian angels don't wait for permission to protect others. They see what needs to be done, and they do it, because that's what love looks like when it has courage." Through the window, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, where children walked home from school under the watchful protection of a community that had learned the value of vigilance tempered with hope. The Millbrook Elementary flag flew at full staff, a symbol of resilience rather than mourning, of lives preserved rather than lost. Sarah stood at the window one more time. Grace balanced on her hip, Emma beside her with her own protective instincts engaged as she watched. Her daughter absorbed the family legacy. 3 generations of guardian angels, each shaped by the understanding that with great capability came great responsibility. The wooden angel remained on the windowsill, its carved features worn smooth by years of small hands and whispered prayers. It would stay there through Grace's childhood, watching over another generation of children walking safely to school, a reminder that guardian angels were real and that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who never asked to be heroes. In the distance, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the autumn air, the most beautiful sound in the world, possible because 25 years ago, a pregnant woman had chosen to stand watch over innocence with precision fire and unwavering moral courage. Guardian Angel's mission was complete, but her legacy would continue through every child who grew up safe, every parent who remained vigilant, every community that chose protection over fear. The oath to defend the innocent lived on, passed from one generation to the next, carried forward by ordinary people capable of extraordinary love. The children were safe. The guardian angels were watching, and the future remained bright with endless possibilities. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible story of courage and protection. Stories like this take hours to research, write, and produce. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel, and sharing this video with others who appreciate tales of real heroism. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you these powerful stories.